Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the prayer and spiritual life of Dr. Martin Luther King. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the prayer and spiritual life of Dr. Martin Luther King, Dr. Lewis Baldwin, one of the most prominent individuals dealing with the life and times of Dr. Martin Luther King. And of course, Dr. Baldwin, you know, as well as our audience, that you've been with us, just many times.
Many times.
Goes way back.
Always
Back down that very 80s. And so you're back with us again, and we're delighted to have you here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
And to know the topic that you're dealing with here, because I think that this is an unusual approach to Dr. Martin Luther King.
Right.
And I think that you have with you today a couple of the books.
That's right.
Of the many books that you have written, and we'll have you to talk about those books when we talk about your background, education, and your experiences. But here you are here with us to talk about the prayer life and spiritual life of Dr. Martin Luther King. But let's talk about the scholastic or the book life of Dr. Lewis Baldwin in a real sense, to talk about some of your scholarship and some of the things that you've done in reference to Dr. Martin Luther King that will again create the situation of having to be here because you're the man that has all the information. Let's talk about it from that perspective.
Let me first say that I grew up in Camden, Alabama, which is part of the Alabama Black Belt. I grew up there during the Civil Rights Movement, participated in some of the demonstrations, etc. And I was inspired by that kind of experience to do research on the Civil Rights Movement, and particularly the life and thought of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. I matriculated at Talladega College from 1967 to 71, majored in history, minored in political science, and from there, of course, to Crozer Theological Seminary in New York. And of course, I completed the work for the PhD at Northwestern. And while at Northwestern University, I studied the life of Dr. King very intensely and became very interested in writing books about his life. I published actually my first 2 articles on Dr. King in 1984. So this, I think, is 30 years of research and writing about the life of Dr. King. So I guess that's what I can say. I was inspired very much by his leadership, by the King-led civil rights campaigns throughout the South, and also by Dr. King's thirst and interest in the intellectual life.
You know, today the topic is the spiritual life, prayer life, and spiritual life of Dr. King. Let's talk about it from that perspective. Exactly what was and how would you define what you consider to be Dr. King's prayer life and his spiritual life?
Yes, I think first of all we begin with his sense of the meaning of prayer. Dr. King understood prayer as conversation with God, communication with God, to use the language of the folk tradition, ringing up heaven. So that, and he had a very energetic prayer life. Dr. King prayed daily. He prayed in jail cells, as you recall. He prayed in church, in the streets, during street demonstrations. So he had a very energetic prayer life. And he believed that prayer is a part of the spiritual journey that each person must take each day of our lives. We wake up in the morning, we have a sense of some power that is higher than we are. And we try to connect in some way with that power. So this prayer life for him was a vital part of the spiritual life, that larger phenomenon that we call spirituality.
And so when you look at Dr. King's prayer life, what are some of the things that you think that our audience ought to know about that prayer life?
I think people need to understand that he took prayer very seriously. He believed deeply in the possibilities of prayer, the potentialities of prayer. He also had this biblical sense that God answers prayer. So he was very much in the Christian tradition in that regard, and very much in the black prayer tradition as well. So I think we need to look to him as a model for how to take prayer seriously, how to make prayer a part of our daily lives, our daily experiences, because prayer should be connected to everything we do. Spirituality is that large. Prayer is a part of spirituality, Dr. King said. He also said that nonviolence is a part of these spiritual disciplines that he associated with prayer as well. So I think we need to take seriously the need for daily prayer, to make our spiritual pilgrimage one that occurs daily. I think that is important.
Very good. Of course, Dr. Baldwin, let's take this first commercial break, and then we'll pick up with this information. And we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and he's talking about Dr. Martin Luther King's prayer life and spiritual life. And Dr. Baldwin, I think before we had our first commercial break, you were talking about some of the aspects of Dr. King's prayer life and spiritual life. And so let's pick up at that particular point.
Well, Dr. King had what he called a self-imposed day of silence. And he would
self-imposed day of silence.
He would take a day off from the events of the movement, and he would retreat to some hotel or to his pastor's study for a day of fasting and meditation and prayer and a rigorous discipline of think time to sort of think through the events that would occur in future movements.
Now, I never thought in terms of Dr. Martin Luther King from that perspective, but he actually took a day off. Nothing between that would happen in that day, and that was part of his life.
That's right. During the early days of the Montgomery bus boycott, he would take a day each week. But as he became more and more involved in the struggle, his schedule was such that he could not take a day.
But he would literally take a day off to himself and prayer.
Yeah, and sort of isolate himself from the distractions of daily life, such as television and radio. And he would simply pray and meditate and fast and think through the events of the movement, you see. And of course, that was very, very important for Dr. King. He called that sacred space, the space that he had to be alone with God. To experience the fullness of what he called divine companionship. So yes, that was very important in terms of his personal prayer life. As you well know, he prayed daily. And he didn't fast as much as Mohandas K. Gandhi because King had a very good appetite. And we know that Gandhi fasted at points until he had to he was so weak he had to be carried by his followers and his aides. But Dr. King did do some fasting, particularly in jail cells. And if you look at a picture of him sitting in the Birmingham City Jail, he has his hands up looking through the bars. And that was very, very important for him. Prayer was a part of spirituality. Spirituality is necessary, he said, for social transformation. In other words, you not only talk about changing the world, you pray to God and you become a co-worker with God in changing or transforming the world. You see, and prayer is a part of that.
And so that's an extraordinary understanding of Dr. Martin Luther King, that he actually became that involved in the movement, but he was also that involved in prayer and the relationship that he had with God. And so he took it was more than just a movement. It was an ordination in a real sense that he almost imposed upon himself.
That's right. He didn't separate the two. There are those who say, well, you were a minister. Dr. King said, no, civil rights activism is an extension of my sense of ministry. So I have to pray, and prayer is essential because if we want things to change, we have to fight in the streets, yes, but we also have to pray that God will become co-workers with us in transforming this situation into one of justice and brotherhood and human rights, etc.
You know, Dr. Baldwin, we're faced together today with so many difficult problems in terms of how to bring people into a movement, how to make people understand the importance of political participation and et cetera. How would Dr. Martin Luther King's spiritual life, if he were here today, what would be some of the things that he would pray for, and how would we be able to sort of meet the challenges that we face today?
I think the point you just made about the context in which we live today is very important, because we're in a post 9/11 world, and 9/11 really gave us a sense of our vulnerability and of our need to depend on God. And I think Dr. King would see it that way, that we went through something quite traumatic on September 11, 2001.
And we're still feeling the impact of it even today, one way or the other.
The impact of that, and the impact of the economic downturn, and we have, I think we feel vulnerable in many ways. We feel insecure and uncertain about the future. And Dr. King always said, when you feel that way, the important thing is to turn to the one who is the Father of us all, which is God, of course. And he understood this sense, this need to depend on God when our own, energy run out. When our own capacity to change things are not working. So I think he would say to us today, pray, but also be active. Because God will not do for us what we can do for ourselves.
Well, Dr. Martin, Dr. Baldwin, looking over Dr. King's life, and if you look in terms of the organizations that we have working today and et cetera, do you find that there are any organizations that think in terms of the spiritual aspects of what is going on within the, within all of our communities, within the United States today, the importance of tying into something and reaching out to more people, and that we could bring that to the vote, we could bring that to almost any other thing, and it'd be a part of, it would be part of a spiritual life if you were to go out and become involved in trying to make sure that people participated in the political process, or other kinds of things in reference to that. So it's not an isolated kind of thing.
That's right,
what we're saying?
that's right. I think one of the problems we have in this country today is that there is that tendency to isolate what is spiritual from efforts to bring about social change. And I think the Occupy Wall Street movement really didn't have that spiritual base. Dr. King understood the civil rights movement as a spiritual movement, because he said we are drawing on spiritual and moral forces, right? Which means, of course, you have a sense of being connected to a higher power, even as you march in the streets, even as you engage in boycotts, sit-ins at lunch counters, etc. So I can't think of any movement today that emphasizes or stresses, to the extent that Dr. King did, the importance of spirituality in efforts to bring about social change and social transformation. You just don't see it today, not to the extent that it existed in the case of King-led civil rights campaign.
And I think over the last minute we have during this segment, excuse me, I think what we're saying here is that in order to move forward socially, we have to have some kind of spiritual base for it. It might not be a Christian base, but it has to be a religious base. It has to be a recognition that there is something that is more powerful, that is looking in on all of us.
That's right.
And we have to understand what that is, and we're saying that that is the spiritual aspect of Dr. Martin Luther King thought in terms of the Christian aspect, but regardless of what your religion might be, that there is a God for you anyway, and he is always calling you forth, and the only way that we can tie into that as a group is, and of course, Dr. Ball, let me take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following the second commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. Lewis Baldwin, and the topic is Dr. Martin Luther King's prayer and spiritual life. And Dr. Baldwin has given us some information in reference to not only Dr. King's spiritual life, but how that prayer and spiritual life made him a much more effective advocate of social justice. And so, Dr. Baldwin, let's use this final 10 minutes to call upon all of your knowledge and experience in terms of how do we apply what you know about Dr. King and what you know about the situation that is going on today, and how we might be able to apply some of those things, because a large number of folks that we know don't understand Dr. King the way that you, after all, that's 35, 40 years. That was almost 50 years ago. And so there's been a disconnect. So let's try to make a connection between the spirituality and social justice today.
I think first thing I would say is that we need to understand that Dr. King reclaimed the language of freedom and deliverance in his prayers. And that goes back to the ancient Hebrews. They prayed for deliverance, for freedom. And we're still in situations today where we need freedom.
The freedom, certainly.
We need liberation from debt, from the economic crisis, the negative effects of the economic crisis.
Social crisis, education, housing, homelessness, and all of those are there. You see it?
So I think we need to reclaim that language of freedom and deliverance that was a part of the prayers of slaves, very much figured prominently in the prayer life of Dr. King, because the problems that he addressed are still with us. There are problems of bigotry and hatred and intolerance, religious bigotry, war, violence. So I think we would do well to reclaim his language of freedom and deliverance in our prayers. The second thing I would say is that we need to look at Dr. King's creative use of prayer. He, of course, came up with his idea for prayer vigils, prayer campaigns, prayer pilgrimages, prayer marches, prayer rallies. He introduced all of these forms of prayer in the context of civil rights campaigns. We had been used to hearing people pray in church and around the dinner table, but never in the streets.
Out in the streets,
never in the jail cells.
Never
in the jail cells. And Dr. King brought about this creative use of prayer. And the third thing he did, and I think you hinted at it earlier, is that he exposed the black prayer tradition of what went on in black churches to a larger society. Whites participated in the movement in Selma, and for the first time, they heard black prayers, black songs. They had never been exposed to black church traditions before. And through King-led civil rights campaigns, Jews, Protestants, Catholics, white, black, poor, rich, all were exposed to the prayer tradition of the black church.
And all united behind prayer and spiritual life.
Exactly.
Which is to say that if we are all united behind prayer and the spiritual life, that erases all problems with race, with class, with color, and everything else, because that prayer brings us all. That's I would imagine that would be perhaps the only thing, looking at our society today, that could bring us all together, the recognition of the importance of
prayer was that galvanizing force, that mobilizing force that gave people a sense of inner peace, that motivated and inspired them to go out and march and sit in and that kind of thing. So you have to begin with prayer. And I think Dr. King taught us how to cultivate certain kind of spiritual traditions, which include prayer, meditation, developing the right consciousness and the right spirit. He talked a lot about self-purification. He had 4 steps of a nonviolent campaign. First is the collection of facts to determine if injustice exists. Secondly, efforts to negotiate with the powers that be. Thirdly, self-purification. And fourthly, nonviolent direct action if necessary. Self-purification is very important because that is about prayer. It's about meditation. It's about developing the right spiritual life so that one can go out and act nonviolently in the larger public square.
That's a consciousness, a development of consciousness of what is and what is not. Is that right?
That's right. A consciousness of, I think King would say a godly consciousness, a godly ordained consciousness. That is a sense of what and where we should be as human beings in the world. We shouldn't be involved in racism. We shouldn't we shouldn't be involved in economic injustice and war and human destruction. And I think this God consciousness that he talked about a lot had to do with developing kind of spirituality that we can see beyond these problems. And if they exist, we can what? Feel the need and the determination to eliminate those problems.
Dr. Baldwin, we've got about 3 or 4 minutes. Let's give you an opportunity. I think you have with you today 2 books.
That's right.
Let's have you talk about
Okay.
each of those books over the last few minutes
Okay.
that we have here.
Okay,
And I think they've already put them on the screen here. And so let's talk about
Okay, now
these.
the book on the right there, to your
I think
right,
they've got it on the screen here.
for the television audience. Yeah, the book on the right, of course, is my book on the prayer life of Dr. King. I actually trace developments in King's spiritual life, prayer life more specifically, from his seminary days up to the time of his death. And that book is about his prayer life. Now, the book on the left, for the television audience, of course, is a collection of Dr. King's personal prayers. Prayers for uncertain times, prayers for social justice, prayers in times of diversity, prayers for special occasions. What I've done, of course, is to collect about 68 of his prayers. And they are perfect for people who want to improve their own personal devotional lives. I have friends and fellow clergy persons who every day read a prayer from Dr. King's book, this collection of prayers, and they tell me just how important that is and how much it impacts
Prayers are words.
Yeah.
And words are important. And if you look at the scripture, the song, the Lord is my shepherd.
That's right. That's right.
Which is to say that those are the words of consciousness. It's words of spirituality.
That's right.
And the more you repeat those words and the more you listen to those words, the more you become a part of what those words are.
Exactly.
You see, and so that's the evolution in terms of spirituality. And I think that if you've got a book of all of Dr. King's prayers, every one of those prayers in a sense is a 23rd Psalm in a real sense, which is to say it's some of the things that you ought to go around and memorize. Because when you memorize it, you memorize the words, and the words will say something to you, and it will build your consciousness. And then you'll find that the more you use those words, the more it becomes a part of you, and then people will start calling you a Dr. Martin Luther King, like they call you a Dr. Martin Luther King, because in a real sense, Dr. Baldwin, as we get ready to end this show for today, in a real sense, you do represent more than any person that I know, the scholarship of Dr. Martin Luther King, because not only did you participate in the movement with him, but you also, in a real sense, followed his educational and his scholarly
trajectory,
right up to where you are now. You know, you went to the same school that he went to, you followed him here and there, and et cetera, and you started working with him 30 years ago. And so the very fact that you've been so touched by the words that you do through your research simply rubs off on you, and it gives you an opportunity to shine in a real sense like Dr. Martin Luther King. And that's what I think of.
I appreciate it very much.
That's what I think of when I see you, because out of all of the people I know, I think that you've done more in terms of bringing the scholarly tradition of Dr. Martin Luther King and the civil rights movement, because we've talked about so many different things in reference to it, and it's been such a privilege.
Thank you.
For me to be able to call upon you almost at any time and to have you to come back and talk about whatever. I recall that we first started back in 1986
It's been some time.
talking about James Earl Ray.
Almost 30 years.
And each time you come to us, you bring us a new book and new information, and you are such a great scholar. And Dr. Martin, well, let me thank you and let you know how much we appreciate the contribution that you've made to this particular show and to everything that we've done in reference to Dr. King and the civil rights movement. And we certainly appreciate that, and we want you to know that. You see, and we're going to be calling upon you, because we've dealt with you on so many different occasions, and you've added so much to this particular show. And so let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning. Thank you and welcome to the show this morning. The topic this morning is the impact of Christian and secular music on rap music on young adults and youth. And we're fortunate to have with us to talk about the impact of Christian and secular rap music on youth and young adults, Pastor KWalker, who will give us some information in reference to his background, education, and experiences, and Mr. Reginald Williams, who will also give us some information dealing with rap music and Christian music, and a new face in reference to this particular topic, Mr. Joel Ingram, who also has some additional information to give to us in reference to this. And Pastor Walker, since you've been with us on so many occasions, and I think the last time that we had Mr. Williams with us was an opportunity to talk about the first part of this particular show that we wanted to deal with. And so this is, in a real sense, part 2 of the impact of Christian and secular music on youth and young adults. And so let's have you to, again, introduce not only Mr. Williams, but also Mr. Ingram, and then we'll get into our topic for the day.
Well, first of all, Dr. Haney, said thank you for allowing us to come back again and to revisit this subject matter, because it's very important. I think it's very significant that people understand the importance and the impact of Christian rap and secular rap is having on youth and young adults in our society today. And Mr. Reginald Ballhead Williams.
Yes, sir.
He was with us here on last time. I actually met Mr. Williams some years ago when he was actually incarcerated out there in River Bend Prison. And I had to say that because just to diminish that signal that people have been receiving from the prison, that people get in prison system, they so-called find a relationship with the Lord, and then when they get out, they leave the Lord in there, and then they come out and do all the other stuff. But that is so not true in this situation, because he's coming out, he's in ministry, he's preaching the word of God, and he's into the Christian rap field, and they're doing some marvelous, wonderful things in terms of impacting and changing and affecting the lives of youth. So it's so great to be sitting here with him to talk about this very delicate matter that I see. And then Mr. Joel Ingram, I met him just from being out there in the field and ministering and witnessing to his ministry in terms of the Christian rap music and the anointing that he brings to the table in terms of being able to reach to youth and stuff like that. And I'll be the first today to tell you, Dr. Haney, that I don't hear all the lyrics, but my ear is not completely trained to it. But because of these guys, man, I know that there are some people that do hear it.
Hear the lyrics.
And I know God is using that for that purpose.
Let's have you, Mr. Williams, to make some statements in reference to how you became involved in what we're doing here today, and dealing with Christian and rap music and trying to reach young adults and youth.
Well, it wasn't until I hit prison that I realized that the music had a real influence on our behavior. And, there's colleges all around the nation that are studying the effects of music on the mind of young people. And as a matter of fact, they are building prisons on that very note, that they're on the grade scores and test scores and the lyrics and all of this stuff, that's the images and all of this stuff that's being portrayed to this youth, to get them involved with crime and all type of other things early, so they can send them away.
And of course, Joel, let's talk about your situation, how you became involved in what you're doing here, and give us a little background information in reference to yourself.
Well, I got started like everybody else got started. The environment that I grew up in the hip-hop culture. I was born in 1985, Birmingham, Alabama, to a single-parent mother. I had a father who's a crack addict. Then just like every other kid that's going through what we're going through and dealing with the hip-hop culture and growing up in that lifestyle, the number one thing that we turn to is music. But whether people know it or not, music is the number one most powerful influence in his life. There's nothing more powerful than music, and we know the story about how music and how it was created. Most of us do. But I got involved in this because of my pastor, Pastor Curtis Burden, at the Turning Point in Madison, Tennessee. I did a talent show. I used to deal and dab in music years ago when I sold drugs. And after my conversion, after my change, I didn't really want to be involved in that. I didn't want to be one of those people who you said, hey, well, just because I was doing it in the world doesn't mean that I'm supposed to be doing it now that I've changed. Because I just wanted to work a job. I just wanted to be a man, take care of my family, and that's all I wanted to do. And I got heavily involved in the ministry at my church. We got involved in the nursery. I got involved in the van ministry, picking up local youth from, from subsidized low-income housing, those things. And my church runs a van. And the kids on the bus, they just said out of the blue one day, Brother Joe, we heard you used to do rap, and why don't you do something for us? We had a talent show coming up at our church, and I'm saying, nah, I'm not going to do this. Mm-hmm. So long story short, I got involved in it, and I said, what greater tool would there be, to give them some Christian music as opposed to what they're dealing with when they go home. Mm-hmm. So I did it. They loved it, and right after that, my pastor pulled me to the side, and he said, Joel, I really think that's something that you should pursue. And I fought it for a while, but after about a year, the Lord just kind of pushed me in that direction, and I'm here now.
And so in a real sense, Pastor Walker, what we're saying here is that this music, while many people might not understand it, and in a real instance might even credit it with many negative kinds of things, we're saying that this music has a tremendous impact upon youth and young adults. Is that what we're saying?
Well, both genres of music, the gospel rap and the Christian rap, has a negative and a positive impact upon it, in particular.
Okay, well, I tell you what, let's take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, and welcome back to the second segment of the show for today. We're talking to Pastor KWalker, Mr. Williams, and Joel Ankrum in reference to the impact of Christian and secular rap music on the young people, especially youth and young adults. And they've given us some information in reference to the importance of this kind of music, even though many of us might not understand the impact that it is having on youth themselves. Let's start with you, Pastor Walker, again, to give us some statements in reference to this, and then we'll pick up at Mr. Williams, and then we'll talk to Joel in reference and sort of get as much information into this second segment as we possibly can, because we will be joined by another person during this final segment.
Okay, Dr. Haney, what I was wanting to say is that music impacts us in both ways, in a negative and positive way. When I was coming up, back in the 60s and in the 70s, and back in those days, man, we had some positive music out there. Earth, Wind, and Fire, Keep Your Head to the Sky, Devotion, James Brown telling us, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Yeah. Then we had the OJ, they singing Stairway to Heaven, and then all these love songs, and the songs that they sung about women was telling us how to love them. Mm-hmm. There was love songs, and so we grew up having an awareness of a different type of awareness. It was that music was more designed to positively impact us. The blaxploitation movies that came out, Superfly, Hell Up in Harlem, Across 110th Street, all those type of things, they was having they produced the most negative effect up on our communities at that particular time, and they drove us in these various directions. But the movies doesn't reach us like the music. So nowadays you got the music, and what's happening is you got the negative music in some of this secular rap music and they putting video to that, so they got the visual and the audio effects of that, and it drives that negativity deeper down within a person. So what's happened is God has, it's a poison that's in our community, that's in our society, and God has given the antidote to that, just like a flu shot. It's got a little bit of the flu virus in it to help to give you immunization against that flu virus itself. So here it is. God has taken Christian rap music as an antidote to the poison that's in this secular rap music, and we're being able to reach them. And I would love for pastors to embrace this and grab this and understand what God is doing, and quit being so locked up in traditionalism and ritualism and the churchy stuff that they missing what the movement of God in terms of our youth, because our youth are under attack, and God has provided a means to reach them because they're reaching them. I guarantee you they are reaching them because they're out there doing it.
Well, now, how are you reaching young people, Mr. Williams, in a real sense, with your secular rap music, and how do you reach them?
Well, I believe it's a language. You know, it's just like Pastor had inclined that it's your form of music, and it was universal for your age range, and then our